6 November 1943, RAF Medmenham, Buckinghamshire, England. The photograph measured 8 inches by 10. Flight Officer Sarah Mitchell held it under the lamp, her eyes tracing the shadows across the French countryside near Mimoyecques, 28 kilometers south of Calais. The reconnaissance Spitfire had captured it 3 days earlier, flying at 26,000 feet. In the gray autumn light of the interpretation room, surrounded by hundreds of similar images pinned to corkboards, this one stood apart. She reached for the stereoscope. Under magnification, the landscape acquired depth. What had appeared as construction scars became something else entirely. Long, angled cuts in the hillside, too uniform to be quarries, too precise to be bomb craters from earlier raids. She measured the angles with her protractor. 50 degrees, all of them. 5 separate shafts, each pointing northwest across the channel. Her supervisor, Squadron Leader Robert Kendrick, had seen worse intelligence in 2 years of photo interpretation. He had identified the rocket facilities at Peenemünde, tracked the construction of U-boat pens along the Atlantic Wall. But this was different. The scale suggested something beyond anything in the German arsenal. He made a note in the logbook, time-stamped 14:32 hours, and sent the photographs to the War Office with a priority classification. Within 48 hours, the assessment reached Winston Churchill's desk. The Prime Minister read the briefing in silence. German engineers were building something in the chalk hills of Pas-de-Calais. Intelligence suggested a weapon of unprecedented range. If the reports were accurate, London itself lay within striking distance from French soil. 20 November 1943, Mimoyecques, occupied France. Hauptmann Klaus Weber stood at the entrance to Shaft 3 and watched his men descend into the earth. The November rain had turned the construction site into a maze of mud and standing water. Concrete mixers churned continuously. The sound echoed off the hillside, a grinding industrial rhythm that never ceased, day or night. The V-3 project had begun in secrecy 8 months earlier. Hitler himself had approved it. Where the V-1 flying bomb and V-2 rocket relied on propulsion through air, the V-3 would use pure physics. A cannon 400 feet long, buried in reinforced concrete, firing finned projectiles across the English Channel at 1,500 meters per second. Not one gun, but 50 barrels arranged in 5 batteries. Each shaft angled precisely to target central London, 165 kilometers away. Weber descended the wooden ladder into Shaft 3. The temperature dropped with each step. At 30 meters depth, electric lights illuminated the tunnel. French forced laborers moved concrete forms into position, while German engineers checked measurements against blueprints. The design was ambitious. Each barrel would fire through a series of electrically timed propellant charges placed along its length, accelerating the shell in stages. In theory, the weapon could fire 600 rounds per hour. In practice, no one knew if it would work at all. The chief engineer, a civilian named Koinders from the Rockling Steelworks, stood beside the first installed barrel segment. It stretched back into darkness, a smooth-bore tube 300 millimeters in diameter. The concrete casing is complete to 60 meters. We're behind schedule on the electrical firing system. The British bombing of the railway junction at Abbeville has delayed the shipment of transformers. Weber nodded. He did not mention that British reconnaissance flights had increased over the past week. Spitfires at high altitude, flying patterns that suggested more than routine surveillance. The secrecy they had maintained through spring and summer felt increasingly fragile. That evening, he wrote in his field journal by candlelight in the commandant's quarters. The entry was brief, factual, the habit of an officer trained in precise documentation. He noted the progress on Shaft 3, the concrete reinforcement reaching 90 meters. the arrival of 22 additional laborers from the Todd organization. He did not record his private thought, the one that had troubled him since August, that they were building a weapon whose only purpose was to kill civilians in a city he had once visited before the war. 5 December 1943, RAF Medmenham. The new photographs arrived in the morning diplomatic pouch. They showed continued construction, more earthworks, additional railway sidings, and something else that made Sarah Mitchell's breath catch. In the low December sun, the shadows revealed the true depth of the excavations. The stereoscope showed tunnels extending far deeper than any conventional fortification. She counted the shaft openings again. 5 confirmed, possibly more hidden under camouflage netting. Squadron leader Kendrick stood behind her. "What are we looking at?" She pointed to the measurements she had marked on the overlay. "Something that goes down at least 60 meters, angled at 50 degrees. If you project that angle northwest," she drew the line with her ruler across the map, "it passed through Ashford, Maidstone, and terminated in central London." The room was quiet except for the tick of the wall clock. Kendrick reached for the telephone. The call went through 3 switchboards before connecting to the Air Ministry. He spoke for 6 minutes, mostly listening, occasionally confirming details from the photographs spread before him. When he hung up, his face showed nothing, but his hands, Sarah noticed, were not entirely steady. "They want a full briefing prepared for morning. Target designation, Mimoyecques. Classification, most secret." He paused, studying the photographs once more. "They're calling it the Hochdruckpumpe, high-pressure pump, a code name for something they don't want us to understand." That night, in the operations room at Bomber Command Headquarters in High Wycombe, Air Chief Marshal Harris reviewed the intelligence file. The assessment concluded with a recommendation: immediate aerial bombardment to destroy the installation before completion. Harris initialed the order. The raid would be designated Operation Crossbow, targeting what intelligence now believed was a super long-range gun battery. But in the darkness beneath the French hillside, 60 meters underground, the construction continued. And in the silence between hammer strikes and concrete pourings, Klaus Weber sometimes thought he could hear, very faintly, the sound of aircraft engines passing overhead, searching. The 22nd of December 1943, RAF Kingsnorth, Kent, England. Squadron leader James Dalton studied the target photographs in the briefing room. Outside, cold rain drummed against the windows. Around him, 19 other Lancaster bomber crews waited in silence. The intelligence officer marked the target coordinates with a red circle. Mimoyecques. "You'll be carrying Tallboy bombs," the briefing officer said. 12,000 pounds each, designed to penetrate reinforced concrete. The target is believed to be a German supergun facility capable of bombarding London from French soil. Your objective is total destruction. They took off at 16:45 hours. The Lancaster's 4 Merlin engines settled into their familiar drone as they climbed through cloud cover. At 12,000 feet, they broke into clear sky. Below, the English Channel appeared as a gray expanse in the fading December light. 22nd December 1943, Mimoyecques occupied France. Klaus Weber heard the air raid sirens at 17:23. He was in Shaft 3 when the first bombs fell. The sound came as a distant whistle, then a roar that compressed the air itself. The explosion shook dust from the concrete ceiling. Electric lights swung on their cables. He climbed toward the surface. Another explosion, closer. The compression wave traveled through the earth, a physical punch that rattled his teeth. When he emerged, the sky was full of aircraft. Heavy bombers in formation, their bellies opening to release dark shapes that fell with terrible precision. The Tallboy bomb struck with accuracy that would have been impossible a year earlier. The first penetrated 18 meters before exploding. The delayed fuse allowed it to bury deep into the chalk before detonation. The blast created a crater 40 feet across. A flak battery on the hillside opened fire, its 88mm shells tracing orange paths toward the bombers. Weber watched one Lancaster take a direct hit. It broke apart in mid-air, pieces tumbling toward Earth, trailing smoke. By the time the all-clear sounded, 17 Tallboy bombs had struck the complex. Shaft 1 had collapsed completely. Shaft 4 showed structural cracks. The railway siding was destroyed, but shafts 2, 3, and 5 remained intact, buried deep enough that even 12,000-pound bombs could not reach them. 28 December 1943, RAF Medmenham. The post-strike reconnaissance photos showed extensive damage. Sarah Mitchell counted the bomb craters, measured the debris fields. The facility was hurt, but not eliminated. New earthworks had already begun around the surviving shaft entrances. The Germans were rebuilding. Squadron leader Kendrick stood at her shoulder. How long until they're operational? She studied the stereoscope images. 3 months, perhaps 4 if we maintain regular bombing. But they're putting everything into concrete reinforcement now. The next raid will be harder. 6th January 1944, Mimoyecques occupied France. The work continued through winter. Klaus Weber supervised the installation of additional concrete overhead protection. 20-foot thick slabs were poured above the shaft entrances. The design now called for multiple layers of reinforcement, each separated by sand-filled chambers meant to absorb bomb impacts. A dispatch rider arrived at 8:30 a.m. Weber signed for the sealed envelope. The orders came from Oberkommando West. The V-3 project remained highest priority. Completion deadline, March 1944. The weapon must be operational before the expected Allied invasion of France. Weber returned to the construction site. In Shaft 3, engineers were testing the electrical firing sequence on a single gun tube. The test used a reduced charge, firing a practice round into a sand-filled chamber at the end of the tunnel. The sound was sharp, percussive, echoing through the confined space. The shell traveled the length of the barrel in 0.4 seconds. The chief engineer recorded the results. Barrel pressure within acceptable range, no structural failures. We're ready to proceed with full installation. But that night, lying in his quarters, Weber could not sleep. He thought about the weapon they were building. 50 barrels, each capable of firing 5 rounds per minute. 3,000 shells per hour raining down on London. Not military targets, just a city full of people who had no defense against a gun they couldn't see, firing from a distance they couldn't reach. 12th February 1944, Mimoyecques occupied France. The second raid came at dawn. Klaus Weber was already awake when the air raid sirens sounded. This time there were more bombers. The formation stretched across the sky, heavy 4-engined aircraft in precise geometric patterns. The Tallboys fell with terrible accuracy. One struck directly above Shaft 3. The bomb penetrated the concrete overhead protection, but the reinforced design worked as intended. The explosion was contained in the sand-filled chamber. The shaft below remained intact. Another bomb destroyed the camouflage netting over Shaft 5. Work crews moved immediately to clear debris. Concrete was mixed on site now, reducing dependence on vulnerable supply lines. Within hours of the all-clear, reconstruction had begun. Weber stood at the crater's edge and looked up at the sky. The bombers were gone, returning to England, but they would be back. The question was not whether Mimoyecques could be destroyed. The question was whether it could be completed before that destruction became inevitable. That evening, he received new orders. The completion deadline was moved forward. The V-3 must be operational by the end of March. Berlin was growing impatient. The weapon was promised, the weapon must be delivered. In the depths of Shaft 3, work continued 24 hours a day. The sound of hammers on steel echoed through the tunnels. And in London, 165 kilometers away, people slept in their homes, unaware of the gun being built to destroy them. 15 May 1944, Schaff, Southwick House, England. General Dwight Eisenhower studied the latest intelligence summary with a tightening jaw. D-Day was only weeks away, and across the Pas-de-Calais region, German Supergun installations, codenamed V-3, threatened to bombard southern England during the invasion. Mimoyecques remains the primary site, the briefing officer said, pointing to the map. 3 shafts operational or near operational. First test firing likely within 2 weeks. Even Tallboy bombs had failed to fully penetrate the reinforced tunnels. A ground assault was impossible until after the landings. Eisenhower made his call. Continue reconnaissance and bombing where possible. The invasion proceeds. We deal with Mimoyecques once we're in France. 28 May 1944, Mimoyecques, France. After 11 grueling months of construction, German engineer Klaus Weber received authorization for the V-3's first test shot. Shaft 3 was ready, a 400-foot barrel with 25 electrically fired chambers designed to accelerate a 150-kilogram shell to supersonic speeds. Inside the dim tunnel, cables snaked along walls, and engineers made final adjustments to the delicate timing circuits. At 11:30, Weber cleared the shaft. The control team retreated to their bunker, watching the gun's mouth through a periscope. "Ready on your command," the chief engineer said. Weber hesitated only a moment. "Fire!" A violent, rapid series of detonations rolled through the ground. A flash erupted at the barrel's exit, and then silence. Instruments showed the shell had launched cleanly. Whether it had reached its intended impact zone in the channel was unknown. 29th May 1944, RAF Medmenham. A Royal Navy destroyer recovered fragments of a supersonic shell 38 kilometers north of France. Spin scoring confirmed it had been fired from Mimoyecques. Photos showed increased German activity, with camouflage removed and multiple shafts exposed. Photo interpreter Sarah Mitchell submitted the assessment. The V-3 was now operational. Maximum bombing priority was recommended. The Air Ministry agreed. 4th June 1944, Mimoyecques. Weber sensed the invasion was close. 3 shafts with 30 gun tubes stood ready, ammunition stocked, systems tested. They waited for Berlin to authorize firing. The order never came. Instead, at dawn, 64 Lancaster bombers appeared at high altitude, each carrying a Tallboy. One by one, the earth-shaking bombs smashed into the site. Weber's bunker lights died, generators flickered, and reports poured in. Shafts collapsed, tunnels buried, fires spreading. The bombardment lasted 17 minutes. When Weber climbed out, Mimoyecques was a wasteland of smoking craters. Moments later, a deep, continuous hum filled the sky from the thousands of aircraft of the Allied invasion fleet. D-Day had begun. 6th through 8th June 1944. With German defenses collapsing under the Normandy landings, the V-3 project lost all priority. On June 8th, Weber received final orders: abandon the site and demolish everything. He stood one last time before the shattered tunnels. With distant artillery rumbling toward him, the charges detonated, collapsing what remained of the massive gun system. The V-3, built to bombard London, had fired only once and at empty water. 5th September 1944. Liberated Mimoyecques. British engineers arrived to survey the ruins. Captain Michael Thornton led the team into the partially collapsed Shaft 3. Deep underground, they found one intact gun tube, smooth bored, long, and unlike any artillery previously seen. Thornton's report later described the V-3 as an impressive technical achievement with limited practical military value, crippled by vulnerability to bombs and severe accuracy issues. Inside the silent tunnels, surrounded by twisted steel and broken concrete, he felt the weight of the vast human effort spent on a weapon that never achieved its purpose. Epilogue. The V-3 Supergun never fired on London. Canadian forces captured the site in September 1944, and it was later demolished. Post-war analysis confirmed the weapon's enormous theoretical range, but severe accuracy shortcomings. Today, portions of the concrete bunkers still sit beneath the hills of Mimoyecques, a reminder of an extraordinary but futile technological gamble. Klaus Weber survived the war. His recovered field journal remains one of the few detailed accounts of the V-3 project from the German side. Sarah Mitchell helped develop the analytical methods that would evolve into modern satellite reconnaissance. The Supergun, meant to change the course of the war, ended up buried under its own rubble, its single test shot disappearing into the Channel, and its legacy reduced to a silent monument of ambition, desperation, and engineering brilliance that arrived too late to matter.